Hello, it's Duncan. The owner of the Gilded Rose shop is very happy that we're now monitoring the application and can tell her why things go wrong if they do, but she'd really rather like some functionality from us again, and so she's written another story, and that story is quite simple. It is that she'd like to be able to sell Sulphuras, and Sulphuras has no sell-by date and it doesn't degrade. So here it is. And talking it through, we think that, well, no sell-by date sounds like a thing that we should be able to represent in the type system. So let's have a look at that and then see what consequences we get from that decision. Now, all of our items are part of an item class, and these are the properties of that item. And you see that we have a sell-by date here. Now, the question is, what does Sulphuras has no sell-by date, and if Sulphuras has no sell-by date, then it implies that we have to be able to cope with there being no sell-by date for any of our items. So let's just see what happens if we make sell-by date an optional property, a nullable. Well, we can do that, and then we can run all of our tests and see. We might expect it to stop compiling, I think, so let's have a little look. But oddly, it does compile and actually passes all its tests. That's interesting. Well, in order to see the behavior, then we'll probably have to poke some items with actually a null sell-by date. Let's have a look at our tests. We've got a couple of tests. There's persistence test and list stock tests. Let's see what happens if we list an item with a null sell-by date. So we'll put in here and we'll call it, I don't know what, undated. And we'll give it some initial quality, well, some quality of 50, let's say. Let's run all our tests and see what happens. Okay, well, that's better. We've got some failures, and let's see what they are. In fact, we'll run just this test for now, so we can get to them more easily. Now, these tests are approvals tests of the output when we list our stock. And so they check that our output is something like this, and we have a table row here for each one of our inputs. So we might expect that what we actually failed is because we had another line in our output. But actually they aren't failing because of that. They're failing because we expected here a status of OK, but actually we're getting an internal server error. Now, luckily we do have monitoring for that now, logging, and you see sitting in here, I think if we open that up, you'll see that we have logging of the 500 status, but we've also got this logging of text null could not be parsed at index 0. And that's coming out of the code that we put in there to catch any exceptions and return a 500, our catch-all filter for HTTP 4K. Let's go a little way down that stack trace. You can see here that is in parse resolved, and it's in parse. And you see here, this is persisting KT to stock test. So let's have a look in persisting KT at line 29. So this appears to be when we're loading the stock list back in. So we're failing there. And if we remember, our tests here actually create a fixture, and that fixture writes out a stock list in order to be read in by the code under test when it starts up. So maybe it'd be better if we didn't concentrate here, but actually in our persistence tests. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to make this test pass again by reverting to where we were, and then take that and put it into our persistence tests to see whether they are a better way of seeing the problem. So we'll duplicate that. We'll put in the 50 with a null sell-by date, and we'll call that undated. Now let's run these tests instead. Now we've got this exception, and it's a bit clearer here because it's actually the way that this test fails. The save and load file is failing because null could not be parsed at index 0. This is interesting. This is text null. This is, well, the string with the letters NULL in it. How does that come about? Well, this is in save and load. So it suggests that what actually has happened is that we've saved a null into the file, the literal string null into the file, and then we tried to parse that as a datetime on the way back in. So let's have a look in persisting and see whether we can see where that happens. Oh, and here it is, in fact, right in front of us. You can see here that we are putting in this sell by date in this format string here, and Kotlin will put in the string null for variables whose value is null. So we can fix that. Let's do it quickly and easily to start with. So what we want is the sell by date, but if that was null, we'd like an empty string. Let's see whether that fixes our problem. Okay, so that looks as if we've managed to put in the empty string, but now the empty string can't be parsed as a datetime. So let's look at where we're parsing that. Well, in fact, it'll tell us it is in toItem here in persisting. So here we're taking a part that is now an empty string from our tab separated line. So I think what we'll do is we'll pull this out as a little function, and we will call this to local date, and the return type is indeed local date question mark. Now we want to give it just the part we're interested in, so let's make that the parameter of it, and let's make this an extension function, I think. So we'll say convert that to receiver. So now we've got parts1 to local date, and what we want to say in here is that if this is blank, empty would do, but blank is as good, I think, if not better. If it's blank, then it's null, else we try and parse it out. Let's try that. So that suggests that we can save items with a null, sell by date to disk, and load them back in again. Now we can go on to displaying them, so we go back to our list stock tests, do the same here, revert this to undated with a null, give it 50, and put in the comma. Right, so let's run that test. And let's see how they fail. So we're still getting a stack trace, and now we're getting problems reading in the file with things like require non-null, datetime format 2, and if we go down here somewhere, you can see we've got roots kt to map. So let's have a look at roots kt. We're looking for problems with the sell by date, and we've got this date format sell by date. Now, our problem here is that this API is a Java API, our date formatter is a Java class, and so we've got no way in the type system to know that this format can't take a nullable thing. It does tell us here, but telling us and telling us in the type system are two different things. So let us fix this one by hand for now. And I think we can say that if the sell by date null, then we just want an empty string in our output. Otherwise, we'll ask the date format to do its job. Run that. Still failing. Let's have a look. And now we're failing in days until sell by date here in chrono unit days between. So our Kotlin code, where it's interactive with Java, has thrown a null pointer exception. Once again, I think we'll solve this with an if statement. We'll say that if sell by date equals null, then we want to return something. Well, what? I think 0 days. I think that will do. It's hard to know for certain. Some people might put in -1. We could change this to be a string so that it was just blank, but I think we'll just go with that for now. Format that a little bit and run that. Now our tests are failing not because we have an error, but because we have a different output than we were expecting in our approvals test. So let's just check that they are like we expect. And you see that the thing that we had approved didn't have a line for our undated item. You can see our undated item here is rendered as the name, a blank for the date, which is what we expected, a 0 for the number of days until the sell by date, which is what we put in, and 50 is our quality. So that's good. I think we can look at that one and this one. That's the same. But we have another problem with the last modified being yesterday, and at this point we're getting an internal server error. Well, let's ratchet forward a bit. We'll approve that one and that one so that when we run the tests, those pass. So now we've got that one problem. What's this problem? Well, we're getting another internal server error. We've got this hidden internal lines that shows us what the actual problem was. And in this case, it's chrono local date is after. So somewhere we're asking whether something is after null, effectively. And here it's saying item.kt at 22. So we'll go back to item, look at 22, and that says if on is after sell by date. And this after, once again, is a Java method, and so is throwing a null pointer exception because we're passing it a null. This is actually, I think, the worst string of null pointer problems I've had with Kotlin. And I suppose a solution to this might be to use the Kotlin datetime API, but that's still, I think, experimental at this point. So I think we are just going to have to go ahead and continue to fix these problems. What's nice is that we found our tests at least are comprehensive enough that they are finding the issues for us before we ship to production. Let's add to our if by changing it to a when, and then taking account of the null case. So when the sell by date equals null, and that begs the question of what our degradation should be. Should it be 1 when we don't have a sell by date? Probably not 2. So we go and talk to our customer, and we come to the conclusion that actually it's not just Sulphuras. Well, Sulphuras has no sell by date, but that actually the requirement is that items without a sell by date don't degrade. Now, it might be that sooner or later we stock items that don't have a sell by date and do degrade, but our customer, the owner of the shop, says the only item she knows that doesn't have a sell by date is Sulphuras, and if it keeps things simple, then we'll go with that as a requirement. So that's lovely. We can just say 0 in there and run our tests. Now we should have survived our exception, only to have a difference in the output than we expected. And here we are. Now we have, this is the case where it does update when the last modified was yesterday. And we put in this undated item with a quality of 50, and it's come out with a quality of 50, even though it has been updated. So that's the behavior we want. So let's approve that. Run that test. And now let's go and run all of our tests. And they all pass, which is gratifying. I don't think that I'm completely happy with just having that test for our update. I think it would be better, given that we have some updating tests here, if we had one for that behavior. So let's take the last one of these and duplicate it. And we'll call this test items with no sell by don't change quality. So that if we take a banana that has a null sell by date. If we update it by 1 day on any day, it doesn't matter, let's face it, then we should keep a banana. We should still have a banana with a null sell by date and no change. And I don't think there are any other tests that are worth writing, really. We could check all sorts of other combinations, but it's hard to know how we could break this. So we'll just check that that does pass by running all of our tests. Good. And we could check, given that we cheated a bit, that it would have failed by changing this back to 1. And that makes our items with no sell by don't change quality fail. So we've got a good test to show us if we were to mess that up. Put it back, run all of our tests. Okay, well, it feels a little like we've cheated because we've redefined the problem a bit, but often it is the case that once we're in the software, we can see a requirement, an expression of the requirement that our customer couldn't see, and that will allow us to keep our software simple. And I think that's where we are here. We have quite a nice system, quite a nice simple system, by just adding the nullability into that date. Of course, we know now that we're going to have to be on our toes whenever we use the sell by date and pass it to Java, but we also have some tests with a null sell by date in them, so that if we were to add code that did use other Java datetime APIs, I think we might expect that our current test would fail. Have a look at the changes we've made. Well, we've updated our requirements document, our story to reflect our discussion with the customer. We've made our local date, sell by date, into a nullable and accounted for it in this update on. We've approved some outputs and changed some tests in order to give us those outputs. Our persistence tests have changed, again with an item with a null sell by date, and that caused us to have to change the code in here, in our persisting, when we read and wrote. This is a little cryptic, but I think we'll leave it for now. Roots has changed to cope with the null sell by date as well, and we've actually added this one test, this one unit test. So this we can commit with and we're done. Well, that was short and sweet, probably easier than I thought it was going to be, which is nice. So before the next episode, we will go back to the customer and ask what other magical items she has to sell. If you want to see that, then now would be a good time to subscribe. If you want to encourage me to do more of this, now would be a good time to like. And if you do like this, then you'll probably like the book that I wrote with Nat Price called Java to Kotlin, a Refactoring Guidebook. Thank you for watching.